It is February 2026. Russia's war in Ukraine is in its fourth year, and today we want to look at the military situation. I'm Julian Röpke, and this is BILD Situation Room. And we start with footage from the south of Ukraine in the Zaporizhzhia region. There, the Ukrainian army took advantage of the Russians' chaos that broke out after Starlink was shut down and launched at least a limited counteroffensive. First of all, let us take a look at the footage from a Ukrainian perspective. We are here in Prydorozhny, which is a suburb of Ternuvate. Both of these towns fell to the Russian army about 7 to 8 days ago, where they have since raised their flags. We'll take a look at the footage in just a moment. We're now in a situation where the Ukrainians have moved back into these towns with several armored vehicles after having dropped off the infantry there. We can see them fighting right here already, then engaging and eventually defeating the Russian soldiers who had taken up shelter there. We have footage from the Ukrainian side as well, showing us this small counteroffensive here. We will also see the Ukrainian flag being raised in Prydorozhny shortly, as well as footage from the Russian side. That means we can be relatively sure that this counterattack actually took place. Right here we see the Ukrainian defenders or liberators who are now, I hope you can recognize it here, hoisting the blue and yellow flag in Prydorozhny. And in just a moment we'll see that typical pan upwards. That means the camera operators controlling these drones are tilting the whole thing up. And now we're seeing footage from Ternuvate itself, specifically Russian army footage where they're naturally bragging about attacking individual vehicles here. However, where this is, that's what's crucial, namely in the far east of Ternuvate, at the edge of town heading east, where the Russian army had already gained a foothold and released videos on January 30th. Now we see Ukrainian vehicles moving here, which unfortunately also got being attacked and also getting hit. We'll see different perspectives of this tank in a moment, likely a T-72, which was used here by the Ukrainians and has just been attacked by the Russians. That means we can say with certainty that Ukraine has launched a counterattack right here in these last few days. Ukraine is back in the very places that they had lost, at least as of just a few days ago. However, Ukraine also had to suffer losses in the process, and we see it here from the Russian footage that they've lost both vehicles and presumably at least men. We're looking at another video from Ternuvate, which once again shows us the difference quite clearly. Here is footage from January 29th, where Russian soldiers at the entrance sign of Ternuvate, specifically in the very western part, are raising their flag. Now we see the camera pulling back and we see this important small town, which is important not just because it has a rail link, because it has a large factory site where you can naturally find a place where you naturally also accordingly bring in additional reinforcements or dig yourselves in, but the city is also important for that very reason, as we see these current images right now, because it lies on the western bank of a small river, and this bank was actually meant to serve as a defensive line here in Zaporizhzhia. Meanwhile, as mentioned, the Russians have managed to cross it, have gained a foothold here on the western bank, but now we see it here. The Ukrainian army is back in Ternuvate, has successfully recaptured this small town, and as I mentioned, has tried to use this to at least liberate some of those little villages that had previously fallen under Russian control. Let's take a look at the whole thing on the map. We see that we're located in the east of the Zaporizhzhia region in the south of Ukraine. And this is the situation that we have encountered. We have just seen footage from the Ukrainian side showing how they first fought the Russians right here in Prydorozhny and then drove them out. And we saw some footage at the very end, or rather in the middle, we saw footage from the Russian side here on the far eastern outskirts of Ternuvate. And the footage we saw at the end of that town entrance sign, that was actually the entrance sign towards Boykove, meaning here in the west of the city. And in that respect, we can say several things. For example, that this map here wasn't quite up to date, that the combat zone, the orange area here, not only reached Ternuvate from the south, but that also these points that we all saw here, which I've now marked in hindsight, that they were all under Russian control. We've seen more footage as well. It wasn't just a counteroffensive or counterstrike on Ternuvate. We've seen further recordings over the last few hours, showing the Ukrainian units right here as they are currently making their way eastwards, starting from Vostvyshivka, who are also coming under attack here by the Russians and are losing several vehicles there. So we can't say for sure whether the Ukrainians were stopped there or if they've actually managed to bring Wavarivka, Preluki and also Dopolpilya completely back under their control here. That is currently unknown, meaning it's absolutely correct that this area continues to be shown as contested. In any case, we can see that Ukraine is trying to exploit this chaos and the Russians' communication problems following the shutdown of Starlink for their own units. here in the south of Ukraine, and managed at least to bring a very, very small village. We saw it, 10, 15 houses and a small town, namely Ternuvate, back under their control. From Zaporizhzhia in southern Ukraine, we head to Donetsk a bit further east, where we have new footage from Pokrovsk, which, and it must be said quite clearly, unfortunately makes the worst fears come true. Namely, Russia is moving heavy equipment into Pokrovsk. I had predicted it a bit over the last few days, and now we actually have the proof for it. What we have here is a Ukrainian drone that is currently flying into Pokrovsk, and right here we have a mobile mortar system of the type Nona S or 2S9. The Russian army tried to hide it in the middle of a residential area. A 120mm mortar on tracks, we can see it right here, and clearly it is a heavy vehicle, a vehicle that can fire about 10 kilometers. It can shoot for 8 to 10 kilometers, which has now been stationed here, right in Pokrovsk itself. That means we see quite clearly the Russians aren't just bringing in this minor stuff, they're not just bringing in soldiers, but they are also bringing heavy weapons into Pokrovsk in order to push even further towards the west from that very same location. And what Ukraine is doing to stop this push towards the west, we will see in the next video, which is also quite telling of the whole situation in Pokrovsk. Specifically, we see a highway underpass here, or rather a drainage pipe or something like that, or a water duct running under the N32 highway, or E50 as it's still called on some maps, from Pokrovsk heading west. This highway, which leads in this direction, this underpass, is being blown up here by the Ukrainians in a very interesting way. We see a fiber optic guided drone flying inside, and right in there we see this is a massive amount of ammunition, and there are various accounts of this. Some pro-Ukrainian activists, one must say, are claiming that this was Russian ammunition that had been stored right here, intended for further attacks. It was destroyed. I think we can get closer. You can see it here. It really goes back for meters, these ammo crates standing here. However, Mr. Sternenko, who published this, the drone supporter for the Ukrainian army, isn't claiming that, but says it's a road that was used by the Russians to advance, and that is much more likely, which would mean that this here is Ukrainian ammunition. That means the Ukrainians themselves filled up this underpass here with ammunition and then used the drone in order to destroy it from a distance. We see the impact now, and soon we'll see the massive explosion from another angle. Here we see it from this entire explosion, from all the ammunition blowing up here. And as we see, like I said, this is the 4-lane highway leading from Pokrovsk towards Pavlohrad, which is now being blown up here by Ukraine. The whole thing, we see it again in slow motion, basically footage showing us that they want to block the Russians' advance, their further advance towards the west, by simply taking out the main roads leading to Pokrovsk, blowing them up. And all of this also shows us that the claims of the Ukrainian general staff that they are, well, holding the position in Pokrovsk or even improving it. General Syrski just explained this once again, that they're improving the situation here for their own troops in Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. These seem to be more like temporary explanations, at least for the current moment in time. All in all, it certainly looks as though they have given up the city for now and are trying to regroup further west to cut off the Russian advance right there. Let's take a look at the map and see exactly where this explosion just took place. And I find that very interesting. That means we're roughly here, 7 kilometers northwest of Pokrovsk, from the edge of the city of Pokrovsk. And we can see right here that Hryshyn is basically even 3 kilometers northeast from there. That means even this village isn't completely under Russian control yet. We see the Ukrainians who are attacking hard there, who are constantly fighting the Russians with drones there. All in all, it certainly looks as though the new Ukrainian defensive line actually is indeed a few kilometers further west, and they would have basically really dug in here, not just with drones, but also in the form of positions, in the form of trench systems. They would have entrenched themselves there and would be trying to, well, the Russians fight them off here before they can reach it via the road. We spoke with a Ukrainian soldier in the area who told us that the road was basically the only thing that wasn't mined, which the Russians could have used to just drive straight ahead around to the left and right of this highway, what we just saw. There, he said, mines are everywhere. That means the Russians can't conduct any mechanized attacks there, at least not without losing their units in the process. We're staying in Donetsk, but moving to the city of Donetsk, the former city of 1 million people, which is currently about 60 or 70 kilometers behind the front line. We remember at the start of the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainians were right there, 3 kilometers away, like in Pisky. Now they've been pushed back quite far, and yet we're seeing videos now showing us that Ukrainian drones, and not fiber optic drones, but radio-controlled drones from this Ukrainian unit IFG, that they're attacking directly around Donetsk and hitting the logistics there. We also see in between, and we've also verified where these attacks have taken place. That means we are right here in the direct vicinity of Donetsk, and that means we are 60 kilometers behind the front line. And we can take a look at this on the map right now and see above all how it is possible to strike so far behind the front with radio-controlled FPV drones. Because as we know, first off, we see it quite clearly from this static here. The signal worsens as we're near the highway road. So these are not fiber optic but radio-controlled drones. And we know that these drones really only have a range of 15, 20 at most, under perfect conditions, 25 kilometers. However, after that, it's simply the horizon, meaning the Earth's curvature, that stands in the way of these drones being able to be used. So far behind the front. So the big question is, how do the Ukrainians manage to, systematically attack a highway? We see right here there's an extreme amount of traffic on it. It's not like there are just individual vehicles on the road. These are large trucks, standard ones, yeah, probably even Western vehicles commonly used in Russia and now being deployed right here by the Russian army to bring in all of the logistics 60 kilometers behind the front line just to keep the war going on right up there. And in that sense, interesting footage you don't usually see, because we rarely ever see shots from areas that have been under Russian control since 2014, but always just see these frontline areas. There we see horses, there we see individual infantrymen, there we see quads, but just not these major logistics routes here, and these literally thousands of trucks. Of course, thousands of trucks driving from Russia into Ukraine every day to support the army there. And we'll look at it on the map to understand, and finally we can see that even in this case, by chance, eyewitnesses, probably Russians, filmed the whole thing. You see another truck being attacked from the front here, in this case a low loader, probably with a vehicle on it. And the drone hits right there. So we want to take a look at how that's even possible, how exactly Ukraine is able to strike so many kilometers behind the front lines. The whole thing only works by having relay drones flying up in the air and coordinating those attacks from right there in that very exact position. First of all, down here again, Donetsk, the very dark area held by the Russian army since 2014, the other area captured since 2022. And we at least have the capabilities. We've briefly pinpointed 5 attacks. That means there's one here near Selidov, we have one between Avdiivka and Ochrytyn, but we've also got at least 3 attacks northeast of Donetsk in the area. That's already been held by Russia for 12 years. And the only chance, if we look at it up there, so that's 8 kilometers. That means an FPV drone flies about twice that distance. The only way these attacks could have been carried out there was simply that you, for instance, from the free territory up here, attacked from right there. Let's take a look at it. About 60 kilometers, and you need a signal booster drone every 20 kilometers, meaning a large hexacopter or octocopter, which is flying there accordingly, supporting the entire operation, and then maintaining the radio communication with these drones from there. That means we can assume that at least 2 large motherships were deployed right here. The first one was probably loaded with antennas, which then, was parked right here in the air, for instance, maybe 3 or 4 kilometers up. And from there it relayed the radio signals to the second mother drone, which was hovering in the air right about here, or even a little bit closer still to Donetsk. From this mother drone, the small attack drones then took off and launched the various attacks on the highways where the Russians, as we've seen, felt extremely safe, launched these attacks from there. This means there is a massive logistical effort behind attacking so deep within enemy territory with these radio-controlled FPV drones. We recently had a case where the Russians managed to fly a single fiber optic drone 65 kilometers behind the front lines. That means a single fiber optic cable was used there. That's possible now too, but as we saw, it was a total one-off. We haven't seen any more videos since then where Russians managed to push that far with their fiber optic drones. In other words, that's the possibility if you don't have fixed-wing aircraft, if you don't have medium-range drones, to use these tiny quadcopters 60 kilometers behind the front to attack deep in enemy territory there. From Donetsk, we head to Kharkiv in northeastern Ukraine. There's a new Russian video that reveals a lot about the real situation in the Kupiansk region rather than the fabricated propaganda version claimed by the Russian General Staff. Here we have a situation where leaflets are being distributed, asking the question already translated into, do you want to live? And these propaganda leaflets are being distributed to the Ukrainian soldiers there. So they are being dropped over those towns that are being held by the Ukrainians there. We'll see it in a moment. A drone takes off, drops leaflets. They did similar in World War II. Back then, it was planes that dropped these leaflets. And then we're about to see the following. Namely, we see exactly where the leaflets are being dropped. That means we see where the Russian army suspects Ukrainian soldiers to be in February 2026. And accordingly, what is still held by Ukraine in the Kupiansk region or in Kharkiv in the broadest sense. And while we're seeing the departure here, we can now focus on the cities right here. And there we see it. So this is one of the towns where these are being dropped. We'll probably see it in just a moment. Exactly here, the leaflets are flying out now. Pretty hard to see against the snow, but nonetheless, we saw a brief signal being given there. Back there, we see some of those leaves that are now supposed to fly down with the wind. And what's interesting is we are right here over Petropavlivka. And Petropavlivka is a suburb of Kupiansk, which the Russian army, the general staff, already in November claimed on November 20th of last year that this village was indeed already under Russian control, meaning they defeated the Ukrainians here. And this new footage that we have right now, recorded nearly 3 months after that, shows us perfectly clearly that it was once again just propaganda. Once again, they just sent a single soldier with a flag out there, basically. Whether he was killed or not, we can't really say. In any case, the reality is, and we see it right here, Petropavlivka is near the front, so basically just 2 or 3 kilometers away from this dark red area, and roughly, so that's about 6 kilometers away from Kupiansk itself. However, Petropavlivka remains under Ukrainian control in February 2026, and Russia's claims, which has continued since then. First, they claimed they'd taken Petropavlivka, then they claimed they'd captured Kivsharivka, then they claimed they've captured Kupiansk. None of that is true. It's all propaganda to make things look better from a Russian perspective, of course, to put on a show for dictator Putin, that they're constantly achieving successes here. And we should also point out that this is all information going through agencies, through Western agencies, and then being picked up by Western news outlets, news that sometimes report the Russian army has announced the capture of Petropavlivka, and don't question any of it. These videos show now, almost 3 months later, it was all propaganda. The small village, the suburb of Kupiansk, is still under Ukrainian control. We'll look at 2 more videos on drones, specifically about fixed-wing aircraft in this case, meaning drones that fly further than just a small quadcopter. First, we have footage from Kostiantynivka in the Donetsk region, which shows us quite clearly what the fight between soldier and drone sometimes looks like. We have here, I hope you can see it, a Ukrainian soldier who's taken up position on the upper floor of a residential building. And here we have a Russian drone, a fixed wing craft, that's apparently being piloted live. So it's just circling around looking for targets, meaning the Russians are constantly scanning their screens to find out where the Ukrainians are dug in, where they can attack. Now we're about to see the drone's next turn. The Ukrainian is also briefly scared it'll hit him and pulls back for a second now, as it's basically making a direct approach on the house here. However, as I said, we then see the drone fly on and how it just crashes down right now. So right here we can actually see it. Ukraine managed with its very simple weapon to make the drone, which was just up here, fly down and crash right there in the middle of absolutely nowhere at all. There we see it, near what was probably once a bus stop. And nobody was hurt there. And that is actually how things go down in some of these cities. We also see, by the way, this former major city of 70,000 people, where naturally 99% of the civilians have fled. The Ukrainians are the only ones, the soldiers, who are still holding it. And the Russians, who are searching for targets in this ghost town Kostiantynivka. And not just these small drones are being used, but also larger Gerbera drones with a range. There are various reports of up to 800 kilometers. And here we have another video which shows us how small. Sting interceptors of the Ukrainian army attack these drones one after another. That means we see it again and again, these large Gerberas, of which night after night at least 100, sometimes even 200, 300 are deployed. These Gerbera drones are being attacked by Ukrainian interceptors, and at the very least they are trying to intercept them before they can finally arrive at the site. We've seen some are black, some are green. That means the Russians aren't really consistent with this particular layout. We also keep seeing how duct tape has been used here to secure them. That means these are relatively cheap drones, but very effective drones, because the Ukrainians naturally can't tell on the radar if this is a live unit that's armed or a Gerbera as a decoy. And the Ukrainians naturally have to track each of these drones, because since you can't see exactly from below what kind it is, they have to send an interceptor after it. You never know whether it might be directly programmed for a target and is carrying explosives, or if it's simply a diversionary tactic. So in the end, it doesn't matter, and the Ukrainian army has to try to bring down every single one of the drones that they detect over their own skies to the ground. Finally, let's look at the west of Russia, specifically at the Belgorod and Bryansk regions. There is footage showing us that Ukraine, which is currently being attacked every night, specifically the civilian sector, is being hit. Last night again, there were more deaths and injuries, this time in Odessa, where residential buildings were hit. Ukraine, for its part, is attempting to target exclusively critical infrastructure in Russia, and with quite a fair bit of success. What we see right here is a power plant in the Bryansk region, specifically, I do believe, in Lips, if I'm not mistaken, a power plant that actually belongs to the Russian state, and we are about to see an airburst munition. Here we see it. In the replay, in just a moment, the missile is coming in right up there right now. That means possibly, or the Ukrainians claim that it's here, now we can pull it up again, stop at the right moment, hopefully. Here you see it. So here's the missile. The Russians claim it was a HIMARS that was used here against this power plant, which is certainly possible. And we're about to see this explosion just before impact. Here we see it in the air, meaning the power plant in the Bryansk region was attacked here by the Ukrainians, trying at least as they can. Of course, that's not possible in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but it is indeed possible in the border regions to basically cut off the power supply there through these retaliatory strikes. For one, of course, for the Russians gathering there to attack towards Kharkiv, Sumy and Chernihiv. But of course, on the other hand, as we'll see in the footage, you hit all Russians here. That means you're also hitting civilians. And so they're acting a bit according to the motto, eye for an eye here. We see footage from Belgorod, the city of 300,000, where we just saw that the power went out completely after a strike on a power plant. And right here, we're about to see more strikes. Here we see it. So attacks on the power plant in Belgorod. And then we see these very characteristic bright explosions happening. That means those are substations or the electricity that's basically blowing up there as well. And then we see how all the traffic lights, except for that one there, it's still flashing a bit, how the traffic lights were shut off, and that's why the power there isn't working anymore, at least temporarily. These are pinpricks that Ukraine is carrying out here in the bordering regions. But they want to at least show, yes, this terror, which is being carried out daily against 39 million of our people, we remember. For weeks there's been no heating anymore, and power only for a few hours a day. This terror, or at least this burden, is something we can pass on to individual Russian citizens as well. We just saw it right here in Belgorod because it's located so close to the border, very close to the Kharkiv region. We've had this for several days now. The situation where the power plant is attacked nightly. And we saw the other thing in the region. Bryansk, I think Lipsy is further south, nearer the border. They also attempted to bomb out the electricity there, at least for a while. And please, let's not ever forget this, just like the Russians have been doing for weeks, night after night, and thereby robbing millions of men, women and children in Ukraine, not only of their sleep, but also of their health, because it's just so cold and, of course, naturally dark at night as a result.